Scripture reading for this morning. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. The stories of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. As you have probably guessed, Pastor Stacy and Pastor Susie are both gone on vacation this weekend, and so you get to hear from me today. Unfortunately, I had a cold earlier on in the week, and my voice has just decided that it's going to be squeaky today, so I'm sorry. Hopefully, we can get through it together. I'd like to encourage you and invite you, if you are in the pews, that you will be able to experience the story that we're telling a little bit better. It's going to all be told within this sandbox, and so you'd miss out on some visual elements. If you're more comfortable staying in the pews, that's fine, but if you'd like to take a moment to move up, you are more than welcome to. It's only for this week, I promise. It will go back. And if you end up being in the third row and you feel like you just still can't see very well, you're more than welcome to stand up too. I will not be distracted. I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm Alexis. I'm the kids ministry lead here at Summit. And so our curriculum is godly play. And it's sacred stories, parables, liturgical actions, all told very meaningfully through kind of a Montessori model of education is how it was created. It was created many years ago by Jerome Berryman, who studied with Maria Montessori for quite a long time to develop this curriculum. When he was in seminary, he was feeling like children were not being respected in their wisdom that they actually carried with them, and he wanted to create something that really honored that, while also giving them more language around their spiritual lives. So today we're going to tell the story of the great family. I like to begin with 3 centering breath prayers with the children, just so that we can all get started at the same time. So we'll take 1 deep breath in and out. And 2. And 3. The desert can be a really dangerous place. There's not a lot of water in the desert, and so it can be hard for plants and animals to survive. In the daytime, it can be hot in the desert, but at night it can be quite cool. The wind can blow the sand and scratch our skin. So you'll often see people wearing special clothes. The wind can also change the shape of the sand. So it can be very easy to lose your way. People don't go out into the desert unless they have to. You have to be ready. After the great flood, all the creatures went out into the four directions to fill the earth with life again. The animals and people gathered around water. In that place, there were two great rivers. People gathered in villages, and then towns, and then cities. One important city at that time was the city of Ur. And another was Haran. The people of Ur had gods for everything. They had a god for every plant, every animal. There was a god of the wind, the god of the rain, a god of the sun, the moon, the stars. The earth was alive with gods. But there was a family who believed in one God. They believed that all of God was in everything. They did not know if this was true, but that is what they believed. In this family, there was Abram. And Abram's wife, Sarai. The time came for the family to move from Ur to Haran. They did not know if God would be with them on their journey to this new place, but they went. And so they packed their belongings and made their way. There were many people with them. Older people, children, many helpers, animals. They followed the great river Euphrates. They drank its water and camped at night. It was a very long journey. They knew they were getting close when they began to see travelers along the road. Finally, they arrived. How often Abram would go out into the desert, especially at night. And he would look out at all the grains of the sand and look up at all the stars in the sky. And God would come close. And Abram would feel so close to God. Abram knew what God wanted. They were to leave Haran. And so, they packed their belongings again. All their helpers and their animals. This time, not as many family came with them, but Abram's brother's son, Lot, went with them. They did not have a river to follow this time. It did not guide them. They did not have its water to drink. Outside of Shechem, they climbed a hill. They prayed to God, and God was there. And so they built an altar to remember that God was in this place, and to give thanks to God for being with them on their journey. But this is not where God wanted them to stay. So they kept going. And they stopped again in Bethel. And God was with them there too. And they realized God is not just in this place or that place, but all of God is everywhere. And so they built an altar to remember that God is there, and to give thanks to God for being with them on their journey. But this is not where God wanted them to stay. So they kept going. Finally, they arrived in Hebron. They pitched their tents near the oaks of Mamre, and they knew this is where God wanted them to be. And one night, God called Abram out into the desert. Abram looked out at all the grains of sand in the desert and all of the stars in the sky, God came so close to Abram. And God told Abram he was going to be part of a great family. God told Abram that he was to be the father and Sarai to be the mother. Abram thought this was impossible. By now, they were very old, too old for children. But God said it would be so. And God told Abram to change his name to Abraham, and Sarah was to change her name from Sarai to Sarah. Many years passed, and Abraham and Sarah had no children. One day, 3 strangers came in from the desert. Abraham went out to greet them, and he invited them to their tent for a meal, as was the custom of the day. Sarah took 3 measures of flour, which was a lot. She made bread, and they ate the bread and the meat and water and milk. And while they were eating, the strangers told Abraham that he and Sarah were going to have a child. Abraham, he laughed. And Sarah, she was outside of the tent, and she laughed too. They were too old for children. The 3 strangers went on their way. And do you know what happened? Sarah had a child. She and Abraham laughed when that child was born. In fact, they named him Isaac, which means laughter in their language. Isaac grew up to be a fine man. And Sarah, old and full of years, died. And Isaac and Abraham buried her in a cave beneath the oaks of Mamre. Now Abraham and Isaac were very sad, and Abraham was so lonely. But he knew he had something else to do before he too died. He needed to find a wife for Isaac. And so he sent his best helper back to Haran, where they still had family. And just outside the city, the helper met a woman named Rebecca. Rebecca helped the man get water for his animals and himself, and she invited him back to her house for a meal. And over the meal, the helper told Rebecca and her family about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and the great family. And Rebecca decided that she wanted to be part of the great family too. And so, being as courageous as she was kind, Rebecca made her own journey. And just outside the camp, Isaac went out to meet Rebekah. And after a time, Isaac and Rebekah were married. And Abraham, so old and full of years, died. And Isaac and Rebekah buried him in the cave next to Sarah beneath the oaks of Mamre. Now Isaac and Rebekah, they had children. And their children grew up. And they had children. And those children grew up. And they had children. And on this went for generations and generations until your grandparents were born. And they grew up and they had children. And those children grew up and they had children, and then you were born. And you also became a part of this great family, which are as many as the stars in the sky and as many grains of sand in the desert. Now, I wonder what part of this story is the most important. That Abraham came close to God. That you are part of the great family, as many as the grains of sand. It was a long journey. When he found out he was going to be the father of many. Yeah, we are part of the great family. They trusted God. They laughed, and yet they trusted. They knew that they could go out into the desert without water because God was with them. Realizing that all of God is everywhere. Something can seem impossible, but God can make it happen anyway. We can learn from a sandbox. I wonder, what was your favorite part? me telling the story. When they built their altars. They started their steps of faith with provision along the water. Rebecca, courageous as she was kind, made her own journey. Abraham went out into the desert to feel close to God. Abraham and Sarah kept their faith the whole journey. I wonder what part we could leave out and still have everything that we need. Hard to leave anything out.
So like you could leave out the other people because it didn't matter. They were on their own journey.
You could leave out everybody else and they would still have their journey. They left the struggle in. Now, I wonder where you are in the story. can be anywhere in this story. Sarah laughing at having a baby that old. It takes a lot of courage to travel alone in a desert. There's no running away from God. All of God is everywhere. God was not mad when people were laughing. Easy to feel safely comfortable back at the camp. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, our altar at Bethel, the altar on the hill outside of Shechem, Haran, Ur, the great river Euphrates, and the second river,